we're here with Eriselda Danaj. Is that how you say your
Eriselda Danaj or Danaj?
Danaj?
Yeah.
Danaj. Oh, okay. And you are a PhD student at IESE, right?
I
Ish.
finished, so I defended my thesis a month ago, more or less.
Oh,
Just
that's
less than a month
awesome.
ago. But I'm still there for another couple of months until I move to Australia.
Oh, you're
So I
going to
still feel a
Australia?
student. So yeah, I'll move to Australia to Macquarie University Business School
That is
in
a
February
big
2024.
change. That is a massive change, but awesome in a lot of
Yeah,
ways.
it is a
Yeah.
change, but I was there this year in last February, so it feels less of a change because now at least I have an idea of how it will look like.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if you want to tell your story and why you actually got into. So first of all, thanks so much for doing this. It's an
Oh, thank you.
honor, and I think it's going to help out a lot of people over many, many years of thinking about whether they should, do a PhD or go into the graduate school or just feeling like not lost as
Uh,
as one
I,
does.
I don't think they can avoid that, though. I'm a big fan of
My
being
God.
lost. As a
Oh
good way of figuring out things. But why I did that, I've thought a lot about it this month because like I had never thought about what would happen after I finished the PhD. You get so much into the process that you kind of forget that it will actually happen. Like there will come a day that you finish it. And I'm very reflecting. I'm like, okay, what could I have done different? Or like, why did I even do this? I don't
yeah,
think it was such a choice for me. Like it's weird because in a way I took a lot of time and I tried different things to figure out whether I really wanted to do like a PhD in business and where and with what
uh-huh.
type of people. And then even to see like where I like teaching actually and I like research. But I think in many ways I always felt like there would be a natural step because I was a nerd kid. I loved studying. I loved
Yeah.
everything from history to philosophy to science, math. That was like a thing. So once I realized that the PhD was a next step in the education of people who eventually found themselves enjoying studying and asking questions. So every time I ponder this question, I'm like, I don't think I really had a choice in a way. It's kind of, I would have done it. I went to how
Yeah.
many detours,
Yeah.
but it
I
was very helpful though to still, although I felt like that will be it for me, to still pause and proactively try to do other things to figure out whether there could have been other ways to do research and ask questions, not necessarily in the
yeah,
format of a structured PhD program.
absolutely. So where did you grow up? Was it in
Mm.
France? Like that?
No, no.
No.
It's very interesting. I don't know why. I've lived in US for 3 years, and in those 3 years, I don't know how many times people have asked me whether I was French, and I'm French. People would be like, "What?" Because I'm so not French. I grew up in Albania, in the south of Albania, so not at all France. I grew up in a very small place. It was, I have to say, a place where education was now has changed a lot, but back then it was not as much a priority because Albania had just come out. I was born in the 90s, the year that the communist system changed and
Mhm.
democracy came in Albania. Like people were, it was a transition period. So people were trying to go abroad, figure out new ways. And the democracy was a big hope to figure out, for example, how to compete in the new labor market. And then it was like free, a lot of freedom that people didn't really know how to manage. So also the education was a bit conflicted because during the communism, education was the path that people wanted to and parents would push. My
Yeah.
parents come from that. So education is the thing if you really want a good life.
Yeah.
And they had some of that, but
Yeah.
also they were living in a different world. So a lot of people, parents also were telling their kids to just go abroad and figure out, like explore a new path. That was not the case with my parents. They were
Yeah.
still very much, you're going to get
Absolutely.
education
Yeah.
and then you're going to figure out And I grew up with that. Like I was very unhappy. I was very unhappy to be born in a small place, I have to say. So
Yeah.
I was an annoying kid to my parents. But I remember my uncle, who was a physics teacher, he gave me this globe, which was also like a night lamp. And I mapped Albania very early. So I grew up with this feeling. My parents would always tell me every time I would nag them about something, they'll say, well, you'll grow up and then find your thing. And they'll be like, yeah, find the country you like or the city or like do your own thing. So that was the spirit with which I grew up. A lot of like the narrative was that education was not an option. Like me, my brother, my sister later on had to get educated and had to really work hard. We
Yeah.
wouldn't even take a day off. My mom was a nurse, so she could assess very quickly whether we had fever or not, and then she'd be like, to school.
So that feels like a lot of pressure. How do you deal with that? The reconciling this sort of pressure? Because I'm assuming now it's becoming internalized.
I mean, that's my brother. He just left. He visited me this weekend, and he'll tell you, yes, it was a lot of pressure for him. It was not for me. I was oddly complaining all the time, and that my parents were kind of stalling my education because I just wanted to spend my whole day reading. So that is why, whereas there was the narrative that fitted with me because I naturally spent my days. Bless you.
Thank you. Sorry.
I naturally spend my days reading. I really was very curious. I would ask my parents, I would spend so much time to find some books that were hard to find in our city. There were times I remember when we had to ask like family abroad to bring me certain, I don't know, I remember like there was a time I was into geography and history, and they had to go to Italy to get me like a certain book that I had convinced myself was very important for me to read. So I don't, there were pressures, definitely, absolutely, but
Yeah.
not about the studying, honestly. For me, it was mostly the pressure was to figure out how to carve out as much time as possible to kind of isolate myself from what was happening so
Yeah.
that I could do the things I really liked, which was reading and then just I spent a lot of hours reflecting at a very young age. It's like, okay, because you don't have a comparison, so you don't know what the other kids are doing in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I convinced myself that everybody everywhere was preoccupied only with studying and learning. And they were like so super smart that when I would come across these other people, it would be so hard for me. So that was like, it's the pressure of idealizing the rest of the world in a way that nothing you can prepare, it will ever be enough because your imagination is like others are like doing it better. So that
Yeah.
was, I would say, a self inflicted like pressure more than
Absolutely. That seems like that's so, in my mind, that's how I often think as well. Where you're just like, you idealize as sort of where everybody else is, and you sort of think in your head, like, how do I get there? I don't know how to do that. And it's such an intense sort of thought. And for a lot of me, in terms of me, is just like training myself not to do that. But it's still hard, you know, of not feeling that. So then where did you do your undergrad? And so did you do that in Albania and then you came?
yeah, that was a very, very heartbreaking moment for me because, as you can see, I spent a lot of time in my head. So I convinced myself that I would do my schooling abroad. That was not the case for a myriad of reasons that, I mean, it just happened that way. So I did my bachelor in Tirana, which is the capital of Albania. It's a European system, so bachelor is 3 years. And then you have to complete another 2 years in order for your education to be um, completed. May I say it's because in US, if you do a 4-year bachelor degree, you can enter the job market. That's not really the case in Europe. So I did the first 3 years in Albania, managed to convince my parents to, I don't think I convinced them. It became like a one-sided decision. So then I moved to Italy for a year and I got a scholarship. I went to Slovenia for a double degree master's program. So you spend a year in Italy, one in Slovenia to get like a master's. And I moved to the States after that for a year and a half. That was a huge change for me. So I
Really?
came to, it was huge because from Albania to Italy, Slovenia is still easy because you are around the Balkans, so we're different. Not really. I spoke Italian. I learned Italian since a kid, so I knew the culture. It was not really complicated. But then, when I came to the state, I celebrated my 24th birthday in Delaware. And imagine you come from Slovenia, which is nobody knows where it is when you come to the
Uh-huh.
States. And then you come to Delaware, which also people don't know where it is. So when I came to the airport in Philly International, people were like, "Oh, where are you from?" And I said Albania, and I was coming from Slovenia. And when they would ask where are you going to Delaware, everybody was laughing. They found that very funny. So we were like, "Why?" That was a change. It was changed the school, the system, people. I was super. I credit a lot of everything that happened in my life after that age to my time in US because I came there to study big data analytics and finance. My background was finance accounting. And that's for the first time ever when I really felt so empowered, but also energized to be like, you know what? Like, I don't think this is what I want to spend my life doing. I think I felt like really liberated and safe for the first time to kind of set at different questions. It was not like, what am I good at doing in school, but rather, what would I really be excited to do afterwards? So that helped me to take a leave of absence for 7, 8 months, went to Europe, volunteered in Portugal, spent some time in France, Italy, Albania, mainly volunteering and teaching and research. Then came back to University of Delaware for another year, where then I spent this time to figure out what type of research I really wanted to do. So by then I knew I wanted to do a PhD.
Yeah.
And that's where I met Wendy. I met wonderful professors at University of Delaware. I had Professor Gary Weaver, which first introduced me to business ethics, Wendy Smith, which was wonderful, and others. And from there, I moved to Spain, where I did eventually my PhD in ethics and
Yeah.
organizational behavior.
So why Spain? That's a big move, right? Like I would imagine that I would imagine that that would be a little bit more tricky, I guess, to convince other people, especially once you're already in the States, right? And then they're like, "Why are you going to Spain?" It seems like so a lot of so I'm Canadian, so I completely understand that. I'm born and raised in Canada, but a lot of the university system, at least higher education, is very American centric. Um, and then to go to Spain, I think would be that's an interesting story. So why would you go there?
I mean, it's obvious, that's why you even asked the question like that. Those were the two countries I considered. I mean, Canada and Spain at the end. So I considered other, but I knew after. So I spent the first year and a half in the States. I loved it, and it's still US is a country that feels like home to me. So I come there very frequently for work and also for personal reasons. It always feels like that. But like my home country is a country I can never picture myself really live for the rest of my life. So it was
Mhm.
more like it's in a country where I come in to reflect and get energized and stay grounded a bit with what I'm doing and why. But I realized the first time that it's just not it for me. And then I took leave of absence. I came back again. And the second time it was a lot better. By the end of it, I already knew I didn't want to get my PhD in the States. Although it made so much sense to everybody that if you want to become a successful professor, and especially in the business school world, and the connections and all of that, I listened to all of that. I had wonderful professors advise me, and I really took a lot of time. But what I knew is that already by then, my path was very out of the ordinary because, in the States, I would also tell you that where you go to get your bachelor matters. So everything after it's kind of,
Yeah.
you go to the Ivies and then you go to the next one. And so for me, it was like, I got my bachelor at University of Tirana, and every time I had to apply, I have to insert that because it doesn't exist in the list of schools that is. So it was like, it doesn't really matter because at this point, I felt I wanted to get my education at a place where I could craft my own path. So I knew that there were things I really needed to learn. I didn't know what they were, but a lot of them were not academic. So I felt I just wanted to go to a place where I want to find out what's this urge and what are these things that I kind of feel like I need to see, but I can't. In the US, it would have been wonderful in terms of productivity and like moving fast, but it didn't feel like the space for me to allow me that kind of. I like getting lost, I've taken all of this, and that didn't seem to align. So that I knew, it completely excluded from my list all the US schools. Then so it came between Canada and Europe. And in Europe, I knew I wanted to study ethics. I knew I was very interested about behavioral ethics. So that kind of also informed the choice of schools. So I knew I wanted to leave US, but I didn't want to just go to any school. So I felt it has to still be an international school that will allow me to get in an environment where there is still that wish to be connected and network and also compete in a healthy way. At least that's how I thought. So yes, a business school was an obvious choice because of that focus on ethics. Because the people there, they have a business ethics department. I knew professors, I knew others who had direct experience with the staff and alumni. And then it's Spain. I honestly, at the end of the day, I just sat down I remember I got a lot of the answers and offers on the first week of March. I remember sitting on my kitchen table in Delaware, and a friend of mine looked at me and said, "You're going to Spain, aren't you?" And I had this big smile, and I was like, "Yeah." Because to me, it felt like if there is a place where I'm gonna learn to be happier and like be healthy, it has to be a place like that. I was like, if I cannot sit and just be with myself and find my peace in a place like that, I was like, then I'm gonna need like serious help.
How do you get this sense of self? This seems like you're really, um, you're really putting a nice barrier between you and in the sort of competitive market, or feeling like that you have to be number one, which, like that is such an intense feeling. And how do you make sure that you are staying you as you're doing this?
I think I felt this way when I came to Spain. So these were things that now I can articulate. Back then I didn't know. I just called them like gut feeling. I was like, I don't know. I just know this is it. And that's one thing I had since a kid, because growing up in that environment I described in the beginning, it taught me that I couldn't rely on the people around me, not because they didn't know more or I knew better, but simply because we had completely different paths. So my childhood friends, my relatives, my family, none of them has chosen the life I have. I mean, every time we meet, it's really difficult to even catch up because they don't know what to ask me. So they just say, "How are you? How is your health?" And then that's it. So that helps me, because when you are 5, 6, 7, and you realize that people can love you, it's just they can't tell you anything about what you have to do. It seems bad at that age, but for me it was really good because it matched with my personality. Like I'm very, I have my own structure and I'm very self critical. So getting that from the outside, it doesn't help much. It's just messy.
Mhm.
So it worked better for me when people were like, "Okay, I'm here. Let me know if you need something, but like figure it out yourself." I didn't feel like, "Oh, why don't I have people to show me the way?" And it was good. And I was like, "Okay, then whatever's gonna happen." But I have to say that when I came, for example, at TSA Business School the first year, I remember it now with so much love, but back then it was painful, because like I would talk to people and I was so it was clear in me the Eastern European, like Albanian, you have to be not just the first, but you have to be like the first and so far ahead that even if the others want to catch up with you, they just can't. And also the American, like I was living on coffee. I was having 10 coffees a day and sleeping every 48 hours, because for me it was like it's a wasted time, to sleep. You don't need that. So I was crazy. And I remember how much love I got and how much support from the people, which is why I still believe going to Spain is the best thing I did for myself. because people would be so kind. They wouldn't take that as like this person is unbearable, but they would joke and they'd say, okay, you can have your lunch, it's nothing is gonna happen. So you can just relax. And then I had professors who would give me feedback. They would be like, I know that you feel like, you have to always be like your best, but it's okay. And then over time, when you get that type of support, which is not, and there have been even people that, it didn't work with them, and you have to figure out how to coexist. It was quite painful. I changed a lot, even in ESA. I changed department. I changed completely the structure of my thesis. I changed advisors. But there were always people, which I would think they had so much life experience beyond the academic know-how that they could see beyond whatever struggle I was going through. So every time I'd knock on their door and I'd be like, oh my God, I'm a disaster. I was like, I'm never gonna work. They just were very patient. And I remember people telling me, oh, you'll figure it out. And many times I'd be angry because I was like, why is everybody assuming I will figure it out? I was like, I have no idea. What am I doing? But it worked. Not always. So I think it's a process. But it helped me understanding that it's nobody's fault and it's nobody's responsibility, neither mine, that to not know what's the best path for me, or to believe sometimes that the best path for me is like be the best and compete. So, but even now, honestly, it's not that I'm immune. There are many times when I see somebody I know and then I'm like, oh, I am so happy with them that they are doing great. And then in a second, you feel like, oh, maybe I should go back to writing that thing myself. I just take time and I'm like, this is not it. This is a moment to celebrate whatever good thing happens, and then it's fine. Like, I'm gonna take my own time and do the things I have to do without feeling so reactive to whatever happens in the world.
Yeah. I love that. I'm very well aware of that feeling. And it always feels like for me that I need to be optimizing and figuring out what is the best possible way. And I mean, it's even really, it's funny when I go onto like YouTube, that I'm all over YouTube and I'm looking at like what other people are saying and stuff about PhD journeys. And the whole thing is like, how can you be more efficient? How can what are these productivity tools and all this kind of stuff? And in my experience, yeah, that there's some degree that is an important thing. But in my experience, it's this like moment where you kind of stop and you get clarity in terms of, wait a minute, like, what is this all about? And there's like, you either get it early on, or you get it, much later on in life, because like the journeys that we all go on, there's no right path. There's not a single way. And you don't even know when you're doing it, is like, am I doing the right thing? And I feel like a complete buffoon doing this. And I'm not like, there's nothing here that seems right. And I wish I knew, but I don't. So I mean, I can either sit here and sort of let the world go by and sort of be in my own thoughts, or I can try to figure out what it is that I'm about. And I don't really know, but I kind of know, you know.
I love
How do
that.
you get, yeah, how do you get that? How did you navigate towards figuring out what you wanted to study and what, you're talking about ethics. And I think this is very intertwined with ethics or a sense of purpose or sense of who you are. Um, and I used to be very skeptical about ethics. I'm going to tell you that, like
I
Ray,
am too.
I was like, yeah. I think people are like, they'll just do it, right? Like, I don't think that they have sort of a lot of guiding principles. But the older I've gotten, the more I realize that sometimes that is important. And I don't know I don't know why. In my view, it's almost like, hey, you were raised in a certain family, had these principles, and they're imprinted on you for a very long time. Um, or maybe you have, behavioral traits or personality traits that guide you, that other people don't have because of, various different experiences when they're younger or even older. Um, so I don't know. How did you get into studying and thinking about ethics? That doesn't
Um,
seem like a thing that's necessarily, it's not going to make you money.
oh,
In
yes.
terms of being at a business school, heck no. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
why?
Um, I was listening to you very fondly because I totally agree. I don't think like we might believe, I'm not sure yet that even though we believe we made a choice in this moment, we can pinpoint when we articulate it. I'm not sure we really made the choice then. Because, for example, I was very good at sciences when I was in school. I went to a high school that was super tough high school. You'd be bombarded with physics, chemistry, mathematics every day, multiple hours a day, but also with literature, language, history, geography. It was like a social experiment in Albania. So one class in a out of 25 schools in the country had this type of very heavy high school training. Back then, you were young, we didn't know. So it was kind of like a fun thing to do. And it was very hard for me because I loved mathematics, but I loved history and philosophy as well. I remember the classes. I was debating with my teacher so strongly about certain things that I felt were not right. And corruption and ethics is a big topic in countries like Albania because, transition period, there is a lot of opportunity for people that they don't like principles and good contact. And I think I was also personally affected because my parents were living in that uncertain political sphere. So being the elder child, I was concerned with these topics. I was like, okay, it's not fair. How do you hire and fire people? How do you promote the good ones? And how do you make sure that there is some fairness and justice? Then I was also very pragmatic. So that's also like my connection with paradoxes and contradictions in general, because I was very self-aware that coming from Albania, most likely, it was very likely that I could not even leave the country at the age I did. So I wanted to get an education that even in a place where ethics was not very, you know, present, let's say, in the economic life of Albania, I wanted to make sure that I would be fine. So, and I could have a normal life, not necessarily make money. That was not much of thought in my mind, but I just wanted to be able to have some independence, so I could have my normal life there. That's why I chose finance and accounting, because back then was a school where all the people who didn't have much support, they could still compete. It would be tough, but there was still some scope. And I did the same in Italy because it's not very different, even though they seem very, very different countries. So when I came to US, it was different. The classes were no longer super hard exams, crazy studying, get the grades. We had a lot of assignments and a lot of discussions in class. And it was new for me because first it was new that not everybody had traveled and learned as much as I had. That was very shocking to me. I could speak 4 languages every day. So that helped me a lot then to not feel as lost in US, but to feel a bit more part of, although it was different, I could communicate with many people and I learned so much because I learned from people I had a lot of friends from Asia, for example, which never even pictured to go to Asia from Albania, and they taught me so much. And then very quickly, this earlier interest I had in my high school and university on these topics of what's the best way to organize life so that even people who are not at the top of the pyramid, they don't need to have luxurious lives, but at the very least have some chance to progress. So
Mhm.
that they really came up for me. And I really knew when I took the first business ethics class, it was an elective with Professor Gary Weaver, because we had to write our name for the professors. I forgot the card. But because I was so vocal during the class, I remember Professor Weaver come to me and he said, "You are Eriselda, right?" And I said, "Yes." And he told me, "You are in the wrong program, but I'm willing to help you to find your program." And that was it for me. So that was the day where I remember going home and feeling so, I slept for the first time in so long. And then I could feel in my body, like the very first time, it felt like the things I really cared about kind of reconciled. Like I was present with everything else. And the rest was just figuring out where to study these things I really cared about. But so was it intentional? Not really. Was it like, oh, I knew that I'm going to do this and that? Far from that. It was a lot of exploration. I knew I would have a long path. I knew making money quickly and succeeding quickly was not going to be my goal and not even going to be very reasonably likely considering everything. So that's why I was not scared to just try and restart and ask people, get their feedback. And I was also very lucky because just happened to meet people who were so wonderfully ready to help me.
It's such an interesting thing. I think of that all the time. And I'm actually super vocal online, and I kind of get myself in trouble because I'm like, hey, don't do a PhD for, for career
I know.
success. I know. And I do get in trouble. Let's just say
Don't
that.
stop doing that though, because it's very important to many people.
I think people need to understand, like, this is, but maybe someday, right? Like maybe all of this stuff will matter in, and you'll go back to Albania and you'll become the prime minister of Albania or the president of Albania.
Highly
You know,
unlikely.
but you don't know how all of this stuff works out, and it's often we have to make these trade-offs where there is a, well, I don't, do you know Jim March's, a little bit of Jim March's work, the basic sort of idea, we have to often make this trade-off between efficiency and thinking about prosperity and success, and just saying, hey, every once in a while we kind of have to just take a step back and say, let's kind of go do things that are weird, that make no sense to anybody, and it's just what we think is right, and maybe it's actually going to turn out in the end, I don't know, um, but maybe it's going to work out in the end, maybe it doesn't, and it's such a paradox, like you're saying, right? Like
Yes, I love
uh,
paradoxes.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because when I listen to you, I'm like, oh, this person's all about particularly where you gave up, where you went to, where you grew up, where the school choices. It's like, oh, this is totally like going, and then you're gonna go into Wall Street, and you're gonna do all this stuff, and take over the world. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, well, really, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Like everything you shared about this, and then I was looking at some of your YouTube videos, and at times I was laughing, at times I was very focused because they resonate a lot. And honestly, I don't have answers. So I've had this conversation so many times with a lot of PhD students or those that want to do PhD. Some eventually did, some decided it was not for them. And it's a very difficult thing for me to do because initially, early on, I was like, everybody should do a PhD. It's amazing. It's wonderful. It's like, it's just this transformative journey. If you really, though, allow yourself to go through that process. But then over time, I was like, wait, because ethics is such a big thing in my mind. I was like, am I doing the right thing to suggest people to do something so excruciating? I was like, it's almost unethical, knowing how hard it is, and maybe it's not monetary doesn't make sense to anybody who tells me they want to be rich. I'm like, no, don't do the PhD. Seriously, go early on. You don't even probably need education in today's world. Pick something else. But now I'm more at the stage where I'm like, you know what? One thing I learned about the PhD is this idea of it depends. And it's funny because you start the PhD thinking you know a lot. And then you go along the line. And now when people ask me questions, I'm like, how do I answer that? I don't know how to answer that anymore because it depends on so much. And it's even this choice. So it's like now I try to be more cautious. So I try to get to know people more. And if I see that somebody has that urge, before I was a lot judgmental, honestly. now I can say, although it maybe didn't appear as much, but inside I knew how, like, I would see a young person said, I want to go to Wall Street, and how sad I would feel, because I was like, why? And I would feel like, oh, maybe this person doesn't really care about what's happening in the world. But now I empathize a lot more. So now I tend to think, if that's your urge, for whatever reason, only you can know, because we can't internalize other people's lives. I'm like, okay, so let's talk about how can we help you, or how can we create a space where you can explore that path, but without completely burning yourself on bridges to having any other. Because maybe you change. Maybe somebody at 23 feels they want to do Wall Street, and they go to 30 or 40 or even 50. And they're like, you know what? I just want to do that thing. Like, I want to study archaeology, or I don't know, or like be a musician. That's the thing at this stage. I'm like, maybe it is true. The PhD is not for everybody, but not because it's tough. And I hate when people say, oh, PhD it's not for the faint of heart. I hate that, because to me, it's like most people would be able to get through a PhD if the PhD was healthy. But if we frame it as if it's not about being tough and so resilient and good at it, but rather, is it for you in this moment with this atmosphere in the world? And you can keep an open mind. And you're like, maybe not. Maybe, I don't know, in 20 years, the universities won't exist at all. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I know, I know, and I also think like too, we stigmatize some things. We, as probably a collective, probably most academics probably do this more so, is we stigmatize things that are very success or success oriented, right? So going into investment banking, and we sort of think, oh, that it's a terrible route to do it, because you're just doing it just to make a great big and make a bunch of money and all that. But who's to say, like, that provides a tremendous amount of value in this society, right? Like, huge amounts of value is generated by the banking system if we didn't have that. Um, and we have to take a step back and sort of say, hey, let's have a deeper, richer conversation about what this actually means, right? Like, part of the reason why we had the Renaissance, for example, was because we had a really rich banker that was funding it in Italy, right? And without those things, we can't necessarily have the world, the richness that we have today.
I mean, even our research, if you think about it, how much of the funding comes also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, like, in Europe, we have a lot more state-funded
Yeah.
universities and research centers, and we complain about it. We're like, oh, we need to bring the private sector because they push us more, and because they'll make us more innovative. So there is always pros and cons, and I totally agree with you on this idea of. I love that you use the word richness. It's like I love that. That's the thing. I think sadly we do lack sometimes because of the pressures. We want answers like, is this good? Is this bad? We want the net. It's like, okay, but tell me, like, does this work for me? That stresses me a bit, I have to say.
No, I know it totally does. Oh my gosh.
I
Yeah.
can feel like when people tell me, yeah, but tell me quickly. I'm like, oh, no,
Yeah, I
I'm
don't
not the
know.
person for that. I want the richness. I want us to get a cup of coffee and like, can we talk about this? And it's also contributes. Like
Super
now I'm doing
stressful.
like now I'm doing a lot of qualitative work, ethnography, which is new for me. But
Yeah.
it's been so amazing because when people hear I'm like, I'm a researcher, hi, how are you? And then initially people are like, oh, you're one of them. And it breaks my heart because I'm like, we are good people. We want to do things. And then over time, a lot of people are like, sure, you're a researcher. They're like, you don't have many answers, because every time they ask me, I'm like, I don't know, but here is what I can ask you back.
Yeah.
Or like, here is how I'm thinking about it right now. But I'm like, ask me tomorrow. I might change my mind. And you can see, to people who are not researchers, especially, and to those that don't have, just for example, when I talk to senior decision makers, or people who are in positions that have an overall view of markets or organization or people in general, they tend to be more okay with uncertainty and with saying,
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
no.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So they see that as, oh yeah. But then to people who more have experience, and it's absolutely not a shortcoming, it just tells of how we are used to think.
Yeah.
And then to them, I sound like they're like, yeah, you. Especially if I say study ethics, you're like, oh, you are one of those people. And initially, I used to feel bad, but now I see that with so much more. It makes me think, and I like that they feel so comfortable to just tell me, and I'm like, it's a feedback that I ponder about. Because I'm like, how can we do this? Like, how can we have the rich conversations, but also be able to wrap up quickly and tell people, okay, don't wait for my paper, or don't wait for these famous professors like agenda. Here is what you can use today. Because that's also a trade-off, you know. It's-
Yeah, no, it's super. I think about this a lot, in terms of, we want an answer. So we do these regressions all the time, right? You're well aware of them, and it's this basic premise behind the regression is that there is a right answer, right? That we're going to arrive upon that, and then all of a sudden, science is going through this kind of crisis at this moment of saying, is this right answer correct? Um, so with the replication crisis and all that kind of stuff, which I'm assuming you've probably thought about, it's such a fascinating thing that it's almost institutionalized in our society that there has to be a right answer, and that there is this sort of way to get to success, right? That's all everybody talks about, is what does it mean to become successful? And I think so. I just want to ask you one last question before we sort of wrap this up: is what do you define success in your life? What does that look like? And what would you tell other people that are thinking of doing this? Um, what would you define success as?
Okay, that's a very tough question. I'm working on a research project exactly on that question right now, because it's work in progress, and it's an evolving. Like I think I know what it is, and then next day I just change my mind again. But how I handle it right now is, I know what for me it's not success, because I don't know the answer, and I'm totally okay with not knowing it. But there are a few, I call them boundaries, to which I have figured out over time that for me, that's not, I have never felt successful. One of them is being squeezed into this high paced, I don't have to think and breathe way of living life. That for me, I know that there is all the research. I have colleagues who do research on this idea of busyness equating success. So if I'm busy, I must therefore be important and be doing things. That doesn't work for me. So that's the thing I always warn myself. Okay, that's not it. And formal, like putting things on CV, like one-liners and fancy things, that sadly, and I say sadly because it could help me maybe, but it does not. And not establishing healthy and important relationships with people I respect and admire is also not part of it. So I would never be able to cut short somebody or prioritize, my paper or something over a relationship with somebody. That I would never be able to. Because I know that even if it works in a short run, it's going to eat me inside to a point that nothing is going to matter. Like I won't be able to look at that person or like to wake up and function. Um, I could tell you that all success is for me to be happy, but I have big questions about the obsession we have with happiness and always being positive. I could tell you happiness is about feeling good about the things I do, but I've studied so much about feeling good that I have questions about, well, hedonic, mentality. Is that all it is? I could tell you it's about me discovering who I'm supposed to be, but then are we work in progress? Do we find ourselves? Do we make ourselves? That's also a process. So those are all questions. It's just that if there is some element, if I feel at the end of the day that I'm still curious and I still genuinely care about a couple of things, I don't have to care about all of them. And I'm trying. I feel good enough. Successful, I don't know. I don't even know whether I have that thing in me, which is like, I'm going to be successful. That's not it. Now, to the people that want to do a PhD, which I'm fully aware that they might have a completely different thing. It feels good, you know, maybe to go on stage, give talks, to people want to read your papers, give you like thousands and hundreds and thousands of citations. There are many ways, or do a PhD to even make money. Why not? You can go work for Google, invent amazing things, and I would say to ask a lot of questions to many people who think differently from us. To me, that has been the key. I have many strong opinions, and I try to stay open-minded. So while I have friends that help me feel good and make me feel, you know, you're okay, we love you this way, successful or not, whichever version, it's also very important to stay engaged with people who think very differently. That was very painful for me to do, but I think that helped me not just get through the PhD and you know, move a bit and be able to do some things, have some choice in how I live my life, but it really helped me also for my own well-being, because I don't have that feeling I had as a kid, like, oh, the rest of the world must know everything and I am so behind. Because of relating also with people who say, you know what, I totally disagree with you. And I even have people who are like, oh, I hate the way you think. Before I would feel flushed and I would feel so, oh, God. Now I'm like, okay, why? Can you tell me? It's like, can we like keep talking about this? So I think that can help you figure out anything, because whatever advice I give people, they'll be like, yeah, but I want to make money. Yeah, but I also want to be the number one in my field. So whatever bullshit I say, they'll be like, that doesn't work to me. Or somebody can be like, yeah, but I don't come. Maybe somebody, Albania is small, but I know friends who come from countries where they're like, I didn't even have that, you know? So while getting my education, I can't go to all these places to learn all of this. So for me, it would be to maintain this sense of, I don't know if I can call it skepticism, but like, okay, let's stop and ask the other people who would do it differently. Because maybe in that you can figure out something to maybe maximize your very limited resources, repurpose them. I am not a strategy person, but for example, one thing I learn a lot is from my friends who are in strategy, because it's amazing how you think about the same issues.
So Esmeralda, with that, I don't want to keep any more of your time. I do appreciate the fact that you are talking and sharing your experiences and sharing all of the complexity that we go through. Just thank you so much, and I
Thank you
guarantee
very
this is
much.
going to help a ton of people make a
We
lot
don't
of
know.
hard decisions. Who knows?
Let's accept that maybe not.
No, I
But I
know,
think
just like one. Yeah, yeah,
but I
absolutely.
thank you for this wonderful work you do. It's truly really important. Even though maybe you have those days where you feel like maybe not. I
But
really
that's
think
good though
it's
too.
worth
That's what I always think about. Hey, we need other people to see this kind of stuff. That hey, it's never there's nothing that's right or wrong. You just go through it.
it.
So,
Thank you
but
very
thank
much.
you. I appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.